Welcome, Jane Clements-Smith, Executive Director of Feeding Pennsylvania. Before the outbreak of COVID-19, how would you describe the mission of your group?
Sure. So Feeding Pennsylvania is the state association of Feeding America food banks. And our mission is to support the 9 Feeding America food banks across the Commonwealth by helping spread awareness about hunger in Pennsylvania through advocating at the state and federal level, helping them do programming like nutrition education through their pantry network, and also helping them fundraise for that kind of programming.
And how many food banks are members of your group?
So there are 9 Feeding America food banks, and we distribute food through a network of 2,700 agencies. So they're your pantries, soup kitchens, shelters. So our warehouses really are large distribution sites that can take in a ton of food. And like I said, we move about 160 million pounds of food annually through that distribution network.
Well, try to give us some insight into what goes on at a food bank on a typical day before the COVID-19 outbreak.
Sure. So before COVID-19, you would see at a food bank a number of different volunteers. Like I said, they're doing some box distributions. We did senior boxes. We did some special military share boxes. So they might be putting together that kind of work. And then you'd also see a lot of people in the warehouse working on orders that would be going out to their partner agencies. And then you'd have various departments working with agency relations and government relations and before and after school type meals. And then since COVID-19, there's been this major shift. I mean, obviously, our food banks are having to comply with social distancing. We are following the CDC guidelines for the cleaning of all of the areas where anyone is, but specifically the warehouse where volunteers are. Actually, a number of my food banks have moved their volunteer packing to off-site warehouses to protect the employees where they are and to have a greater space to do that social distancing. And then some of the food banks have had to shift to do their own distributions in mass quantities, sometimes because they were doing distributions where multiple people, or even like somewhere around 500 people might be coming at one time and grabbing the food they want. We have to kind of shift now where people are doing drive-through distributions where a car might come through, pop the trunk, and then the food is delivered right into the trunk of the car.
Now, before the outbreak, there were eligibility requirements. Are they still in place?
There were eligibility requirements, but we have advocated in the state and federal government to get those eligibilities waived. And we're hoping to find out today. There's a third part of the emergency food assistance program on the USDA level, and we're feeling very confident we're going to get the waiver for that third part of that food, which is a huge win for us. Because before it would maybe only take a person a minute or so to read and sign. But then we moved to, okay, well, they don't have to sign it, but you have to read it to them. And that's a long waiver, obviously, to read, name, address, everything. And then we could sign for them. And then now, I mean, as recently as Saturday morning, we've shifted to the wearing the masks the entire time. So it became harder and harder to do these mass distributions while having to take the 5 minutes to read it and now having to wear masks and keep distance.
And Pennsylvanians are missing work and paychecks like never before. So just how difficult is it for them to get enough to eat?
So there were 1.5 million Pennsylvanians who were struggling with hunger before COVID-19, and 500,000 of them are children. And then since COVID-19, I think the governor said we're way past. We're about 850,000 Pennsylvanians have applied for unemployment. And in March of last year, there were 100,000. So I think the need is huge. I think we haven't even seen all of the need yet. I think people are probably working with what they have. And over the next couple of weeks, as more people are unemployed and as the shutdowns in the counties continue to go on, I think we're going to see people at the end of their reserves needing more and more support.
Pennsylvania has approval from the federal government for a disaster food distribution programming. What's happening and why is that important?
So that's the waivers, actually. That's how we got those waivers. So USDA gave us those waivers, considering the fact that we are meeting more and more need of more and more people who are, quote, temporarily unemployed. But I think we are all realizing that temporary may be longer than we initially thought. So that gives us the ability to serve more people without those eligibility requirements. Because like I said, we are seeing so many more families, even on a daily basis, at a a point where they actually have nothing left.
So I understand under this federal plan, food banks have more flexibility than before. In what way?
Again, it's that flexibility of having to keep all of the paperwork that goes along with those waivers. It also gives us the flexibility. We pack emergency boxes, and you could take donated food or purchase. Food banks purchase a ton of food. So you could take donated and purchased food and give it to anybody at a distribution site, but we weren't able to give that USDA commodity food, which is healthy and nutritious food, and we had a lot of it. But we weren't able to put it in there unless we could target exactly where it went and who it went to and keep all the stats behind it. And our food bank employees around the state are just working an enormous amount of hours, and it took an enormous amount of work to get something like that completed and be able to meet the need. And I think we saw quickly one of our first mass distributions in the Pittsburgh area lasted several hours in the rain and had an over 1.5 mile line. And that's when we quickly understood that following federal guidelines, while we totally agree and understand why they're there in normal circumstances, just doesn't work when you're in a crisis like this.
So you said that people are working an enormous amount of hours, and I can only imagine, but try to describe for us as explicitly as you can, contrast a day at the food bank today versus one maybe a month ago.
Sure. Well, first of all, I could tell you that since March 12th, yesterday was the first day that I had a couple hours off. Including Saturdays and Sundays. And I don't work at a food bank. I work on behalf of all of them. So I would say that a typical day at the food bank, they might have been open 8 to 4:30. You could get a lot of things done around those hours. I think we are all working. Actually, I know several of my food banks are working in volunteer shifts, 9 to noon, 1 to 4, and then 5 to about 8 at night. So they're doing that Monday through Saturday, and Sunday is the only day they're quote off, but it's always then getting ready for the next week. And like I said, it used to be that you'd distribute the food out and you'd send it out and somebody might be able to go into a pantry and get it. And there's been this shift to making these boxes so less people are touching the food and we're able to get it out faster. So I know a lot of them have been coming in nights and weekends to make that happen. So yeah, it's and beyond that, you have a lot of people calling and looking for resources. So I know each of my food banks has multiple employees triaging calls, emails, and anything on the web, trying to make sure that we're not missing anybody out there.
So you mentioned a few times that waiving the requirements is an important aspect of the food bank program going forward. How did Pennsylvania get approval from the federal government to possibly waive these requirements? In other words, how much initiative did Pennsylvania take to make this happen?
It actually was a pretty heavy lift, surprisingly. When we had hoped that the USDA was going to come out with a blanket waiver, considering how quickly this was spreading through the United States, but that was clearly not happening. So every state was required to submit a proposal, and our Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture worked with us. They administer the USDA commodities. So they put the plan into the USDA, and we hadn't heard for several days. The USDA actually came back and asked us if we could be a little more precise, only giving the waivers certain areas that had high unemployment, combined with high COVID-19 areas. And we argued that that was spreading and changing on a daily, hourly basis. So once we felt that they were really just going to take their time on this, we moved quickly, wrote a letter to Secretary Russell Redding at the Department of Agriculture and Governor Wolf, who agreed to write a letter to the USDA. And then we moved even faster with our entire congressional delegation and our senators. And we were able to get sign-on letters from all of them in support of what we were doing. And I think that is really what changed the way we did things in Pennsylvania.
Last question, Jane. What's the best way for Pennsylvanians to help their local food bank during this crisis?
Sure. So you can visit feedingpa.org. All of our food banks are listed there, and you can make a donation there. You can go directly to their website. Either way, we definitely filter things to food banks, but that's what they really need. They need the financial support to keep this operation going, probably for the next month or two.
Jane Clements-Smith, Executive Director of Feeding Pennsylvania, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
PCN is committed to providing the people of Pennsylvania with the most up-to-the-minute information about coronavirus. Daily special programming with civic, business, and government leaders and how COVID-19 is affecting the community. Airing weekdays at noon and 8 p.m. Live special coverage of the Governor and the Secretary of Health, as well as programming designed to inform and assist everyone impacted. Go to pcntv.com for the latest information.
Welcome, Dave Williams. You're host of a show called Pennsylvania Country Roads. In the interest of full disclosure, it's on PCN. What's that show about?
Well, it's really like the bucket list of things to do in Pennsylvania. A lot of it has to do with agriculture, but interesting places to go. Everything from restaurants to places like Nobles and things like that. And we like to tell the story of Pennsylvania. So important to all of us here, and places to go. And of course, right now, we're kind of on a standstill, but at least we like to see what they look like, right?
Right, exactly. So what kinds of guests do you usually have on your show, Dave?
Well, we have everybody from entertainers to actually farmers. A lot of farmers come on, business people, all the people that make Pennsylvania such a great place to live. And, we like museums. Many of the people we got such rich history here in Pennsylvania. And that's one of my favorites, I would say, is the museums and farmers.
Dave, when farmers get together on your show, what do they like to talk about in general?
Well, we like to talk about family. I like to get down to what really makes them tick in their family life and why they like to farm, things like that. There are different. They don't farm just for money. They farm because they love it, and their lifestyle is created by farming. And of course, it's a family lifestyle, and it's a traditional way of living. And it's just interesting to me as well as to them to talk about it.
Well, Dave, I'm glad you used that word lifestyle, because it makes me think during this outbreak of COVID-19, it has different meanings for different people. So try to relate this outbreak to the lifestyle of farmers.
Well, farmers are used to the problems that we have from diseases. Over the years, we've heard about the swine flu and things like this. So they're more particular than probably any of us have ever been. It took quite a few days to get the country to start understanding they should wear masks and be careful of congregating together and things like that. I have a friend that's a pig farmer, and he showers in and showers out every day in the barn, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. And the dairy farmers, very particular. In the past, they've had a lot of diseases that almost wiped them out. And they certainly don't want that. The chicken people and poultry, all these things they've learned over the years to be very precautionary. So our food supply is very safe here in America, where, as you know, other countries get diseases all the time. And when we see that happening, we prepare for it. And we're very careful of what we do.
Now, farmers, of course, already work at home, but what kind of disruption to their routine is the outbreak of COVID-19 bringing to them?
The biggest thing is actually the trucking and the processing plants. Many of the dairy plants, processing plants, are by the bigger cities, and that's where the virus outbreaks have been. So a shortage of workers in them processing plants. Some of them had to close down because of that, not enough personnel. And of course, that leads to dumping milk and things like that. But all in all, it's working pretty good. The farmers are still making the same amount of food as they always did. It's just lifestyles has changed tremendously. People, they're staying home. They're doing a lot more cooking for the family. And of course, they're the people going out there and getting a great deal of food out of the grocery stores and things like that to sustain their families, where a lot of people today, especially younger people, both of them work, and they get home, I don't feel like working, let's go out tonight, right? So it's changed from supplying the actual diners and the restaurants to supplying the households. And that's where the little bit of interruption, and the grocery stores weren't quite ready for that, because many of the restaurants actually get their food from wholesale distributors, and that's how they get it. So it's changed the actual way that they distribute it.
Dave, you mentioned an important phenomenon a few minutes ago called dumping of milk. Just what is that exactly?
Well, when there's an overflow of milk, now fortunately we have the stimulus package and that right now, and the farmers will probably get paid. But whenever there's too much milk, they're going to either dump it or something like that will happen. And normally the price has gone down. I've seen the price just in the last few days go down over $1.00 and that's we lost over 500 dairy farms last year in Pennsylvania. We don't want to see any more of them lost in the future because it really creates an environmental package also that we don't want.
So, Dave, this is a tough time for dairy farmers because they've lost some of their main markets, mainly schools and restaurants.
Right. Not so much the schools because naturally we're going towards summer, so they're used to that. They can switch over to ice cream and things like that. But really, the restaurants is a big change. And a lot of people, there was a scare there for a while, and then some of the neighbors are going to clean out all the milk, and then there wouldn't be none there when somebody come, And I was in the store the other night, and sure enough, there was no milk in there. And until they get all these facilities working, it's going to take some time.
So, what do farmers want the public to know about how they're taking reasonable precautions in the midst of this outbreak?
I think the most important thing is that they're still working every day. They're producing the food that we always have, good abundance, the best food in the world. As you know, so many times, I've been a speaker at fairs and that, and people come to me from other countries and say, we don't realize how lucky we are to have the food we have. So the farmers are out there, they're doing their job.
And plus, they have some experience with working with contagious diseases, because that's something you got to think about when you work on a farm, right?
Absolutely, and they're trained for that. They understand it. They read up on it, and they're the first ones that are prepared for a thing like this.
Now, tell me about any future plans you have for your show that are going to be germane to this COVID-19 outbreak.
Well, right now we're working on some shows about the dairy industry right here in Pennsylvania. And we'll be talking with the Secretary of Agriculture and different ones. He'll actually be on my show this coming week, talking about the problems, talking about what they should do and what to think about if you're a consumer. And, that's really the thing that farmers are always worried about as a consumer. They want to make sure they fulfill what they want. And, there's only about 1.5% of our population are farmers, and we feed 100% of the population.
So in general, Dave, is it just more difficult? You said that the food supply is in pretty good shape, but is it more difficult in general just to make sure you're getting food to table under these circumstances?
Well, the real problem is transportation a lot of times. There's it's capacities in the stores to cool everything. And I have a grandson that's a butcher. And he said the amount of meat and all they sold was almost 4 times what they normally sold. So here it's coming Easter time, and a lot of people will be eating at home, and of course that demand will still be there. So, but use your head when you're out shopping. The farmers are going to be here. We're not running away. The farm don't shut down like that. And the food supply right here in Pennsylvania is very adequate. And very shortly, they're already talking about the farmers markets open up and things like that.
Dave, just one more question. Earlier, I mentioned that your show is on PCN, but for the unlucky few who don't have PCN, how can they see your show?
They can go on my webpage, pafarmcountryradio.com, and they can see that show. And also, they can listen to my radio show every morning on about 30 outlets across the state, and you'll see them outlets on that webpage. And I enjoy this. Is my 21st year broadcasting, and I do the farm show. I'm the radio voice for the farm show, but I'm also I'm the only national farm broadcaster in Pennsylvania, and I'm proud of that.
All right, Dave Williams, host of Pennsylvania Country Roads. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Watch PCN's coverage of Pennsylvania politics and policy, history and culture, sports, and more with the PCN app. Stream live events and video on demand in HD from your favorite device. Go to PCNTV.com to start streaming today.
State Senator Dave Arnold from Dauphin, Lebanon, and York counties, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's good to see you.
The governor ordered non-life sustaining businesses to close. What's the latest on who's affected?
Well, the latest is trying to figure out how to navigate the order that he has in place. Unfortunately, it hasn't been very clear in the sense of who can operate, who can't operate. It's caused a lot of confusion among our community members who, whether they own the business or work at the business, just trying to figure out, who can go to work and what they can do.
Well, just how much specificity did the governor's office give out, or what part of his order just seemed especially, I'll say, vague or ambiguous?
Well, I think initially, before he began the waiver process, it probably wasn't overly vague, but I think then he realized that we need to have some businesses need to be able to operate. We just can't have nothing operating. So then the waiver process began, and I think that's when it started to cause the confusion about who can operate, who should operate, who can't operate, and we've all been struggling together to make sure we understand it and try to advise our community members of what they can and can't do, and it's difficult to do that.
What effect did the governor's order have on closing businesses that have to do construction projects?
Well, it essentially shut them down, and the projects, no matter what they are, if it was something that they were maybe early on in the project, maybe in the middle of the project, he's now allowed projects that are basically completed almost to be completed, but that doesn't solve the problem by any stretch. Whether it's a homeowner who needs work done. I give you an example there. We have a family that they're trying to modify their home because their child is handicapped, and they can't get the construction done to modify the home to accommodate their child who needs to be able to maneuver around the house. And again, that's just one example, but it isn't a valid example of one of the unintended consequences of shutting down the construction industry and the harm it has on some of our members of our community.
So let's talk about some legislation you're involved in. Senate Bill 1105. Just what is it trying to accomplish?
Really trying to again, understanding that we're still putting health and safety of our citizens first. Okay, so no matter what our bill is, the fact that it's about getting business operating, it still is not trying to do so at the expense of the health and safety of our citizens. So we're trying to get the construction industry back in action for the construction businesses that are capable of doing so in a safe fashion. And there are some, in our opinion, that are able to do that. And in fact, the governor has allowed some to get back to work. And we believe that even more should be able to get back to work. Again, providing that they are able and willing and to abide by the health and safety requirements. The CDC's requirements, for example, is an excellent guideline to go by, and we feel we can accomplish both things. We can have health and safety, and we can get people back to work in some circumstances.
Are certain kinds of businesses more of a threat to public health than others?
I think that's fair to say. Places where people congregate in large numbers. As an example, this is unrelated to construction necessarily, but you could have a small family-owned store, grocery store, for example, that might have a couple of employees and a couple of people in there at a time shopping. Or you can have a Walmart where you've got maybe hundreds of people in there shopping at the same time. So I think we're, again, making a bit of a mistake on who we're deciding to shut down and letting to continue to operate.
So I understand part of Senate Bill 1105 addresses businesses that stay open must operate by CDC guidelines. And briefly, just what are the basics of those guidelines?
Well, the basics are that we have to keep, people again from congregating substantially. Excuse me one second. Trying to find my note. It's the social distancing is that phrase that we all hear, but that really is, in a nutshell, the issue that there has to be that social distancing taking place, and wearing of masks, another critical factor. So if businesses can comply with those in the construction industry, most construction operations have a limited number of people in an area. So social distancing really isn't generally a problem by the nature of the work. And wearing masks, of course, is another one that's considered to be critical.
Can the public trust private business to protect their health?
I would say they can trust the private businesses, but they also have to be aware on their own of what's going on around them. So, if I need some repairs done to my home, for example, all right, I'm going to call in someone in the construction industry to do those repairs, and I need to be able to trust him to follow the guidelines, but I need to be vigilant and making sure that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do as well. So, I don't believe that's really a difficult issue to have to overcome is whether or not people follow the guidelines. Because if we're all following the guidelines, we're good to go.
So let's talk about possible relief that would be out there for business that are closed. I understand there are certain loans. There's something called the Paycheck Protection Program that can make loans to small businesses. How much money is involved? Who's eligible?
The Paycheck Protection Program is the federal program. Give me 1 second, please. I have my notes in front of me here.
Take your time.
Yeah, it's the Federal CARES Act. It authorizes up to $349 million in forgivable loans to small businesses to pay their employees during this COVID crisis.
Oh, so if the loans are forgivable, then they kind of turn into grants, don't they? 100%?
Potentially. That's right.
And then I understand there's something called disaster unemployment assistance, and that's something else. Is that a form of loan too? Or might that turn into a grant as well? I'm trying not to interchange those words too much. I don't want to confuse people.
That's all right. In order to qualify for the disaster unemployment assistance, you'd have to have lost your job as a direct result of a major disaster, such as what we're involved in here.
Mm-hmm. Well, Senator, let's move on to something else, and it's on the minds of a lot of Pennsylvanians, is unemployment compensation. And I understand your office says there are employees who are afraid to go to work, so they want to get unemployment compensation benefits anyway. Tell me, how frequent an occurrence is that?
We have had some people indicate that to us, and it has not been a lot of people, but it's been a few, and obviously it's a concern on two levels. If someone's truly afraid to go back to work because of the virus, or on the alternative side of that is if someone's unfortunately trying to manipulate the system a little bit to their advantage, that would be that would be a bad thing as well.
Mm-hmm. So then let's talk about some of the basic requirements then of collecting unemployment under the usual conditions.
They've been lightened a little bit. It's a little bit easier now to collect unemployment during this time period than it had been. So that will be, I think, a welcome change for some people who are having a hard time right now.
Senator, here's your last question. You're kind of a freshly minted senator still at this point. You've only been in office a few months, and here you are plunged into the biggest public health crisis that we've seen in our lifetime. Talk about the challenges that presents you.
Well, it's certainly very challenging. I like to think I'm up for a challenge. It's unfortunate that this is the type of challenge that we're facing and that I'm facing as a new senator. But I took this job, I ran for this job with a desire to do what I can to help our communities and whatever the issue may be. So this obviously is a far more challenging beginning than I had anticipated, but we're up for the challenge.
State Senator Dave Arnold from Dauphin, Lebanon, and York counties, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.